and welcome to today's video. Marking. Now, it's going to be one of the things that you spend a lot of time on, but that doesn't mean that you have to spend all your time on marking. I want to talk to you about the ways that I keep my marking efficient, I time save, and I make it purposeful for me. So let's get straight into it. Firstly, one of the things that I will ask myself is, what is the purpose of this marking? So the reason why I start off with asking that question as a starting point is that when you think about the purpose of why you're marking that piece, it will give you an indication to the way that you're going to mark it. Seems like an odd question, not necessarily. So for example, if the marking of the piece is to provide that pupil with a specific target that you want to improve upon, you know your marking should focus on that target feedback centered. If the purpose of your marking is to provide a mark for a test, then you know the marking is going to focus on a centralised mark. If the marking is more to give general praise to a student based upon the efforts and skills that they have demonstrated, again, your marking is going to focus on that. A lot of the time when we talk about marking, we talk about marking and don't always consider feedback. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the video is marking that is connected towards feedback. So think about the reasons why you are marking the piece of work to start off with, and it will give you an indication to the way that you are going to essentially complete that marking. Secondly, think about not only the purpose of the marking, but whether you want that child to respond to your marking or not. Sometimes we can provide a student with an overwhelming response of marking, and a student can look at the work and think, what do you want me to do with this? If you want a child to respond to a piece of marking, sometimes by giving almost too much information or too many targets can act as an overload of information. If you want a child to respond towards the marking that you've given, make sure that you provide them with an explicit target that you want them to focus on. This is where sometimes when I use what went wells and even better ifs, I don't try to provide too many even better ifs, because I know in particular I want that child to focus on the even better ifs the next time they attempt that question. By giving them an overwhelming amount of even better ifs, it doesn't give them a concentrated area in which they can focus on responding with for their next attempt. Thirdly, marking does not have to take you hours, and you don't have to sit there and individualise every single piece of marking in the concept of writing and writing and writing reels and reels of comments. So this is not me saying that marking shouldn't be personalised, because it absolutely should be. However, that doesn't mean that you have to sit there for hours writing the same comments over and over and over again if you're noticing a specific pattern in your classroom. What I tend to do when it comes towards marking is I provide pre-populated what went well and even better if sheets. So what I tend to do is I tend to read glimpse over a variety of pupils' work, and I start to notice some trends that might be appearing. Based on those trends and or based on the insight that I have towards the piece of marking, I will create a pre-populated feedback sheet consisting of what went wells and even better ifs. So then all I need to do when I'm giving that feedback is stick this into their books, highlight those areas of what went wells and even better ifs. However, what I will also do is that if I think, oh, actually there's a what went well here that this child is doing that perhaps I haven't seen so far in the trend, of course I would add that onto that sheet and recognise with that pupil. The reason why I find this a time-saving tool is that a lot of the time I find when I'm marking pieces of work in regards to feedback, there do seem to be general trends. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've spent marking a class set of books or online a class set of work, and I'm finding that I'm repeating the same comments. Just because you might be repeating the same comments doesn't mean that it isn't personalised as well, because actually as long as it is addressed towards the child and as long as it meets their needs, then of course it is personalised. It doesn't mean that you're cheating just because you're being savvy with your time there. When you're thinking about marking, think about where you're going to store the results of that marking. Now, this isn't coming down towards time-saving tips, but I've found a lot in my recent teaching practice that sometimes I've marked something and I haven't really kept much of a record of the marking. This doesn't always have to come down to numerical marking as well. Something that I've been trialling out is actually on a Google Sheet, for example, keeping a documented notice of the areas of what went wells, but more importantly, the areas of even better ifs, those targets that I have identified from that pupil's work. The reason why this is quite beneficial and efficient for you to do as a teacher is that you can recognise in regards to if pupils respond towards tasks or the continuation of them completing pieces that are going to be marked, whether there might be some trends. This will not only help you to efficiently identify ways to differentiate for that child, but it will also help you to identify areas perhaps for planning. Don't feel like you've always got to be alone in regards to marking. Now, that's not me saying that you're going to pass on a class set of 30 books to a fellow teacher. What this is me saying is don't be afraid to go towards a teacher to ask for further support. So the reason why I'm talking about this is that I think it's highly beneficial actually for teachers to moderate, and this is something that we should be doing on a regular occurrence. I do this, to be honest, instinctively a lot of the time, based upon the fact that I teach a practical subject that encompasses both coursework, practical performances, as well as theoretical exam responses. So actually being able to moderate with a fellow team member really allows me to kind of reflect on my own marking. Or it might be the case of wanting some consolidation towards what mark you would give this. Don't feel like you can't go to other teachers to ask their opinions on marking or some methods that they might have of how they mark in their particular subject. I'm a teacher, like I've already previously noted, that teaches a practical subject, and actually sometimes it is quite useful to know how other teachers in other departments mark or assess their work, because it might give me an insight of a method that I could trial out in regards to a similar piece of work, even though it's in a different subject. Teachers have a lot of knowledge and a lot of different experiences, so don't be afraid to trial out perhaps something that somebody else has done. And lastly, don't feel like you're spending hours and hours and hours on marking if you're honestly sat there thinking, what is the purpose? Marking should have a purpose both for you and for the individual that you are teaching. We don't have to mark and spend hours on every single piece of work that a student has completed. That would be unnecessary and actually too much, like I've previously said, for the pupil to respond to. Marking can be simply recognising the strength of the pupil's work. This might be you going over their week's worth of work and making a comment based upon something that they've done well. That is marking. Don't feel like marking has to be something that you spend excessive time with every single week. Like I've already previously said, your department will probably have a marking policy anyway put in place about the amount of times that you need to provide deep levels areas of marking. And deep areas of levels of marking are usually instances that you want the child to respond towards the marking that you are given, and you are giving those higher descriptive methods in regards to your marking feedback that allows the pupil to understand in further depth their areas of strength and the current areas of development. That's not going to be for every single piece that they do, because that would be unmanageable. An extra tip I've just thought at the end of this video: marking feedback doesn't always need to be written. Think about the powers of verbal feedback. You are constantly giving verbal feedback, probably without even realising it was in a class. It might also be the case that there are a variety of apps that are now online that you can provide verbal feedback through audio notes. Don't feel like feedback that you always have to give to a child has to be written. It can be typed, it can be audio, and it can be verbal. You're giving feedback so much of the time without you realising, and that is marking, even though it isn't always down there in your tracking notes. So that is it. That is it, my thoughts when it comes towards marking, ways of being efficient, my thoughts towards the process of marking, and maybe some tips that you've taken away from you on this evening. So I hope you have a fantastic week. As always, if you have any questions, please pop below in the comment box and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.